I watched my wife as I sat at the grand mahogany table, my fingers lightly tapping against its polished surface. Camille grinned, casually handed me the coffee pot, an effortless gesture that twisted something deep in my gut. It wasn't just the act of pouring coffee. It was the way she did it, laced with quiet contempt, as if I were nothing more than a servant in my own marriage. "Dear, sit at the back," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. A soft laugh rippled through the room, blending with the clinking of crystal glasses and the gentle rustling of fine linen napkins. Camille's family, a group of self-important business elites, barely acknowledged my presence. They were far too absorbed in their own conversations, exuding an air of superiority that was almost suffocating. At the head of the table sat Gerald, Camille's father, his silver hair slicked back with meticulous precision. He was a man who spoke of acquisitions and corporate takeovers, dressed in a suit tailored to perfection. Earning his approval had always been an uphill battle, one I had long since abandoned. Beside him, Lorraine, Camille's mother, delicately dabbed the corner of her lips with a silk handkerchief, her diamond bracelet catching the warm glow of the chandelier. She had never hidden her disdain for me, considering her daughter's marriage beneath their prestigious lineage. And then there was Lucas, the so-called golden child, Camille's older brother and heir to the family empire. Yet, at this very moment, he was more invested in his phone, scrolling through stock prices and answering emails, too engrossed in his own world to acknowledge the man who had been part of his family for the past 5 years. For 5 years, I had swallowed my pride. I had played the role of the quiet, understanding husband who remained in the background, while Camille's family dictated the rules. But tonight would be different. I glanced at my watch, a slow smile forming at the corner of my lips. They had no idea. Not yet. The conversation around me continued, filled with confident discussions of an imminent business acquisition. Their voices buzzed with the certainty of their success, their arrogance thick in the air. And then, the dining hall door swung open. Silence fell over the room as Richard Connor stepped inside, the impeccably dressed CEO of the very company they'd been so eager to negotiate with. He carried himself like a man who knew his worth, exuding an effortless authority. His gaze landed on me, and he froze. At first, it was a flicker of recognition. Then, realization dawned, sharpening into something closer to disbelief. The hesitation in his expression did not go unnoticed by Camille's family. They watched him carefully, their composed facades slipping ever so slightly. "Aren't you the—" Richard's voice faltered as the truth settled in. A strange, heavy stillness gripped the room. The delicate champagne flute slipped from Lorraine's fingers, shattering against the floor. Every head turned toward me as I set the coffee pot down on the marble surface, with an almost poetic sense of timing. The oppressive quiet stretched, thick with unanswered questions. Even Camille's smirk, ever-present and insufferable, had begun to wane. Gerald cleared his throat, his grip tightening around his fork. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. But Richard wasn't looking at him. His eyes remained locked on me, unreadable and unrelenting. "You didn't tell them, did you?" he finally asked. A slow smirk tugged at my lips as I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Tell them what?" I asked, my tone just amused enough to send an uneasy ripple through the room. Camille sat up straighter, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is he talking about?" she demanded, suspicion darkening her voice. Richard let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head slightly as though he were trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Then, turning to face Camille's family, he gave a single, deliberate nod in my direction. "Your husband," he said, his voice calm yet charged, "is the owner of Wolf Industries. For the past 6 months, that company has been silently acquiring stock in your family's business." Lorraine gasped, instinctively clutching the pearls at her throat. Gerald's knuckles turned white as his fingers dug into the arms of his chair. Lucas, who had been idly scrolling through his phone just minutes ago, suddenly went rigid. His phone slipped from his grip, landing on the table with a dull thud. But it was Camille's reaction that was the most satisfying. She turned to me, her face pale, her lips parting slightly as though struggling to form words. Blinking rapidly, she shook her head in disbelief. "That's not possible," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though saying out loud might somehow undo the reality before her. I took my time watching them unravel, savoring every moment before finally leaning back in my chair. Lifting my coffee cup, I took a slow, deliberate sip before setting it down. "As of this moment, Wolf Industries owns 48% of your company's stock," I announced in a casual tone. Gerald inhaled sharply, his expression unreadable. "I'm here to finalize the acquisition of the remaining 52%. I continued, my voice steady. His reaction was immediate. He lunged forward, snatching up the documents Richard had slid across the table. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his breath uneven, his face twisted in disbelief as his gaze shot up to meet mine. This can't be real," he stammered. Lorraine swallowed hard, the refined composure she prided herself on beginning to fracture. "There must be a mistake," she murmured, shaking her head. "You couldn't have pulled this off without us knowing." I tilted my head slightly, shifting my attention to Camille. Her shock was already morphing into something more volatile, a mix of betrayal, anger, and humiliation. "You've been spying on us," she accused, pushing back her chair so abruptly that the legs screeched against the marble floor. I met her glare without so much as a flinch. "No, Camille," I responded, my voice calm and deliberate. "I've been protecting your employees from your family's incompetence." The word struck like a physical blow. Lucas sucked in a sharp breath, his shoulders tensing. Across the table, Richard let out a low chuckle, shaking his head in amused disbelief. "Well, damn," he muttered, reaching for a scotch. "This is even better than I expected." Gerald's face turned crimson as he slammed his palm against the table. "You think you can just waltz in here and take my company?" he snarled. I arched a brow, my smirk unfazed. "Gerald," I said smoothly, "I didn't take anything. I bought it, fair and square." Lucas shot to his feet, his expression contorted with fury. "You used my sister to worm your way in. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? You manipulated her." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Is that what you think, Lucas?" I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "Tell me, where were you when your father was making one disastrous investment after another? While you were off skiing, employees were losing their jobs. The company was bleeding money, and no one stepped in to stop it." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I shifted my attention back to Camille. "For 5 years," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I stood by while your family treated me like an outsider, like I was just another piece of furniture in this marriage. But the second I take action, suddenly I'm a villain?" Camille parted her lips as if to argue, but quickly shut them again, unable to form a response. I sighed, shaking my head. "You all had countless chances to turn this company around. You didn't. So I did." Gerald spat a curse under his breath. "You bastard." I only grinned, pushing my chair back as I rose to my feet, adjusting my suit with ease. "Don't worry," I said smoothly. "You'll have plenty of time to reflect on it. By tomorrow morning, the deal will be finalized." Camille took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" I studied her for a moment, letting the silence stretch before answering. 5 years ago, I offered to help. I had the knowledge, the connections, and the resources to save this company. I paused, watching her swallow hard. "And do you remember what your mother said to me?" Camille didn't respond, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. I gave her a small, knowing smile. She told me that gold-digging sons-in-law should know their place. Sliding my hands into my pockets, I stepped past her. "Well," I murmured, my voice laced with finality, "now my place is at the helm of your family's business." And with that, I left them to stew in the consequences of their own arrogance. For years, they dismissed me. Even as their empire began to crumble, they refused to admit that I might have been the one to save it. I stopped seeking their approval and simply took what they were too blind to protect. Meeting Camille's eyes one last time, I let her see the truth reflected in mine. "I told you," I said, my voice unwavering. "No matter what I did, I was never going to be enough for your family." For a brief moment, I felt something akin to regret flicker within me. but it was gone as quickly as it came. I turned to Richard, extending my hand for the final documents. I'd hate to keep Richard waiting. I remarked, my tone light, as one of the staff members, already prepared, reached into his bag and retrieved the last set of records. Across the room, Gerald shot up from his chair, so violently that it scraped against the floor. "We're not done," he growled. I didn't even glance at him as Richard handed me the pen. "Yes," I said, simply, flipping to the last page. "We are." With a single stroke, I signed the deal. I signed my name with deliberate ease. Across the table, Camille's breath caught in her throat. Lorraine clutched her chest as if steadying herself, while Lucas looked moments away from hurling something across the room. But Gerald, he just sat there, stunned into silence, his mouth slightly agape, as though the weight of reality had finally knocked the wind out of him. I straightened my posture, adjusted my suit jacket, and let the silence stretch. But there was still one more thing left to do. Reaching into my inner pocket, I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward Gerald. His hands, now visibly trembling, gripped the document as his eyes darted across the words. It was an offer, one that stripped him of everything he once held dear. A consultant position, half his current salary, no executive privileges, no power, just another employee under my rule. His expression darkened. "You actually think I'd work for you?" he spat, his face turning an unnatural shade of red, a fury so intense I almost thought he might explode. I merely shrugged. I thought I'd be polite and offer. Then I turned to Lucas, whose scowl was barely concealing the seething rage beneath. "I'm making changes," I said, my voice almost gentle yet firm. "By the end of the week, nepotism will be a thing of the past in this office." Camille looked like she was about to be sick, but for once, she had nothing to say. There was no counter-argument, no self-righteous rebuttal, just silent acceptance of a fate she had never seen coming. "I'll see myself out," she muttered, her voice hollow. Richard gave me an approving nod as I stepped away from the table. Slipping my hands into my pockets, rolling my shoulders back, I exhaled softly, a quiet satisfaction settling in. They had this coming. I chuckled under my breath before casting one last glance over my shoulder. "Let's see what happens next, boss," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face as my gaze flickered over the shattered, broken expressions of family who had spent years underestimating me. Unbothered, unwavering, I strode toward the exit, the sharp echo of my footsteps filling the air, leaving them to sit in the ruins of their own arrogance. But I wasn't done yet. Ascending to the boardroom on the top floor of the company headquarters, I felt a rush of exhilaration. The real work was about to begin. Unlike the entitled family I had just dethroned, the employees, the true backbone of this company, were finally getting the leadership they deserved. The boardroom, once stuffed with Camille's unqualified friends, was now occupied by seasoned industry experts, leaders who actually knew how to run a business. The parasites had been purged, and the firm was already on the road to transformation. I glanced at my watch. Right about now, the news networks were airing the biggest corporate shakeup of the decade, the story of how a so-called gold-digging son-in-law had outmaneuvered an entire industrial empire. Right on cue, Monica, my assistant, stepped into the room, her expression a mix of amusement and satisfaction. "The media is outside, sir," she said. "They're waiting for a statement." I adjusted my cuffs, offering a smirk. "Let them wait." She chuckled, enjoying the spectacle as much as I was. "Gerald also called," she added. "Says he needs to meet with you immediately." I let out a quiet laugh. Of course he did. Gerald was the type of man who had spent his entire life at the top, making decisions with other people's money, never facing any real consequences. Until now, stepping over the massive windows, I looked out at the city skyline, the empire that now belonged to me. Then the door burst open. Gerald's voice thundered through the room. "I'm not letting you get away with this." I didn't need to turn around. I already knew it was him. Slowly, I pivoted to face him. His fists were clenched, his whole body taut with barely restrained fury. "We have no choice but to fight this," he snapped, his voice laced with desperation. I sighed, shaking my head. "Then hire a lawyer," I said simply. But the board answers to me now, as of this moment. The color drained from his face. Lorraine and Lucas appear behind him, their expressions mirroring the shock of people who had just been struck by an oncoming train. "This isn't over," Lorraine whispered, her voice trembling. "We built this company. We built this name." I tilted my head, meeting her gaze with an unimpressed stare. "No," I corrected. "The workers built this company. You just collected the checks while you ran it into the ground." Lucas took a step forward, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're actually enjoying this, aren't you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the conference table, picked up a folder, and slid another sheet of paper toward Gerald. His hands quivered as he read it. A consultant role, half his salary, no authority, no decisions, just a regular employee. With a furious growl, he crumpled the paper and hurled it at me. "I'd rather die than work for you," he seethed. I smirked, unfazed, as Lucas stood beside him, still fuming. This was only the beginning.